Hello, and thanks for joining us today on the Higher Ground podcast. My name is Tom Castriota, and I got the idea for this podcast during a coaching session that I had with one of my mentees. It's a simple idea, really. I interview my friends to cover all sorts of topics about life at work and provide advice to help you reach your career potential. So whether you're preparing for an interview, seeking a promotion, or just curious about what's in the minds of hiring managers, executives, or other interview candidates, then this podcast is for you. Join us as we explore real career journeys, one story at a time. Oh, and from our lawyers, views expressed on the Higher Ground podcast are the personal opinions of myself and our guests and don't necessarily represent the views of their employers, past or present. And if you like the show, please like and subscribe. Thanks again for watching. Hello, everyone, and thank you all for joining us. I've got a treat today. I'm introducing Mike Wacey. Mike and I used to work together at the Capital Markets Company, or Capco as known. We've had a number of fun projects, not the least of which being Fannie Mae. And Mike is a technologist and art data architect, consultant extraordinaire, and an educator. So rather than me trying to remember all the great things you've done, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners, Mike?
Sure, I can give a little bit of background. I've been in the industry for a long time. It's funny, I started in big companies like AT&T and Cigna Insurance, and I took a little consulting job between jobs saying, I'm going to get a real job eventually. And I've been in consulting ever since. So consulting's turned into in my blood, as they say. And I worked at companies like CSC, Capco, Capgemini, as you mentioned. But right now my focus is on education. I like to teach computer science and data science. So I'm doing that and really enjoying it.
That's awesome. Oh, that's awesome. I appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to join us today. And I like to start us off with some this or that, some very highly controversial questions that our audience members, seem to like, or at least I like. Uh-huh. So I guess, that's half the battle.
There you go.
Given the huge number of folks watching. So jumping right in, pizza or bagels?
Depends on the time of day. Bagels on Sunday, pizza on Friday night.
So you've got a structure to the
yes.
answer. I like.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Now,
of course. Go ahead.
No, you first.
Oh, of course. Pizza on Friday night means pizza on breakfast for Saturday too. So.
Okay, all right. So it's I like it. This very much rings true with the Mike Wacey that I know. Structure, order. Having things. Okay, fantastic.
Right. Everything fits in a table somewhere. Right?
I'm not even going to try to explain that to my non-technical friends.
Yes. It's not. No.
How about beer or wine?
Definitely beer.
What kind of beer?
Mostly IPAs, mostly brew pubs. I think beer is one of the greatest inventions. I think the wheel pales in comparison to the invention of beer.
Especially given the fact that when you have enough beers, the wheel tends to go wobbly. Like, how do you trust such a device like that? I suppose.
Right. Exactly. No, beer is. I mean, I don't know if you ever saw these, but Guinness used to run great ads, and one of them was "Beer is good food." So how can you go wrong?
Yeah. No, how can you go wrong? Yeah, and then it was Guinness for Strength was another one I distinctly remember. Those were great. That's awesome. Let's see. So, cats or dogs?
Neither.
Oh
no.
No.
Animals belong outside. I'm happy to have them outside. I'm not so happy to have them inside.
Got it. Understood. Everyone has their preferences. When dining, do we prefer to stay at home and cook, or do takeout, or do you prefer to go out?
So my priority order is I prefer to go out because then there's no preparation, no shopping, no cleaning up, right? That's number one. Number two is takeout because then we don't have to shop or prep and a little bit of cleanup. And number three is cook. I do love to cook.
Mm.
I bought a smoker about 3 or 4 years ago.
Oh,
I
nice.
love smoking, um, all the smoking things, um, and cooking. If I have the time and energy, I love
Mm.
cooking a big meal for lots of people. And it's not so much I love the cooking, so much as I love having the people over and sharing
Yeah.
a nice meal with them.
The social aspect of it. Sure.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
makes sense.
Hmm.
No, that's great. And then sort of our segue question, in-person interview or, phone or video?
In person, everything.
Mm.
I've been teaching for a long time,
Mm.
and even before COVID, with graduate school, we started doing remote teaching, and from the beginning, I wasn't a fan, and now it's
Mm.
become much more prevalent. And I don't think it's the same. It's not even close to the same thing as being in the same classroom with somebody. Same with an
Sure.
interview. Same with working. All those
Mm.
things.
Do you think there's the like what a lot of companies are trying to do are
Hmm.
finding that sort of balance, that 3 days
Hmm.
in, 2 days out? You think that's that's there's benefits to that, or would you be all for full time all the time?
So if we didn't have to commute, I'd be all for in the office all the time, right? But obviously that's not realistic. We have to
Sure.
commute. So it's not like being in person together is perfect, right?
Mm.
There are issues with that. So I think it's a good balance, right? The 2 or 3 days in the office gives us the time together and to do those things. The 2 or 3 days at home gives us the time
Mm.
to not have to commute, which is a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. I do find, at least when I'm, at home and focused, I
Hmm.
do find myself able to get a lot more done because it's easy to avoid the distraction.
Hmm.
But then that social and that networking aspect, like I just
Yeah.
go to somebody's desk and be like, "Hey, I'm trying to solve a problem. Can you help me with this thing?" And just yesterday, that was a good example
Hmm.
of. I felt good at the end of the day because my technical prowess was challenged by
Oh,
someone, and
nice.
I was
Uh-huh.
able to, like, no, I do know how to download a file, so thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, what there you go. One thing I noticed early in COVID was if before COVID, if we had a problem like you were saying, it would be a 10-minute hallway conversation. Once we started working from home, it became a half-hour meeting with more people than we needed. And because there were so many half-hour meetings, we couldn't get to it for 3 weeks, right?
Yeah,
And so everything took so much longer. Anything that required collaboration, like you said, I can working by myself. I can get a lot done really
sure.
quickly, But as soon as I need to collaborate with somebody during COVID, it just took so much longer.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a good observation because it's still true. Like the fact that
Hmm.
not only do we need that kind of quick conversation that we could rep
Hmm.
it, and a lot of times, excuse me, it's not even with like it's not even sometimes big decisions. It's getting consensus onto
Yeah,
some little
yeah,
intermediate milestone that you want to, like, okay, we need to get these 12 things done to get to this point. And that
right,
just any blocker, it's so hard to parallelize those things. So yeah, no,
right, right, right.
yeah, it's
Actually,
like any,
actually, the most important thing for me is me not going down the wrong path. Right? I start thinking about something. I say, "Oh, this is a great idea," and I go talk to somebody, and they're like, "Nah, that's not a good idea." And I'm like,
yeah,
"Oh, you're right. Okay,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, good.
no,
I
that's
didn't waste time on that."
right. Right. Versus, yeah, you went down a deep, yeah. No,
Yeah, yeah.
I have absolutely experienced that. I think this is the best idea. You go and pitch it to somebody and they're
Uh-huh.
like, maybe not the
Right.
greatest idea. Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
what community will give us, right? Is
Yes,
group.
yes.
Yeah.
No,
A
no,
group.
but yeah, it's good to be in a community setting like that and talk those things through.
Got it. Tell me if you would, just before we jump into some of our tell me about the teaching experience. I know you've done this for quite some time, right? And
Hmm.
for many years you're balancing the full time job with
Right,
teaching at night or weekends. And
right.
what prompted you to get into the teaching aspect, and what is it about it you like versus the full time?
Um, for some reason, I've always wanted to teach. And I think even in my day to day career, I don't like telling people answers. I like helping them come to the answer.
Mm,
I like because I think it comes from the what do you teach a person to fish? They can eat for life. If you fish for them, they can eat for a day. And I sort of live that out day by day. Um, and it's just that ability to share what I
mm,
know with other people. right,
Yeah, that's great.
right, wrong, or indifferent.
Well, you've
Yeah,
been doing it long enough, and you've got
yeah,
enough
yeah,
of the
yeah,
credentials and experience to be
yeah,
right
yeah.
more often than not, right? But
Yes, yes, I
yeah,
do. Yeah.
one of the other good traits I remember very distinctly, like you're not like what's the word I want to use? Like when you take a position, that's not your
Uh,
final position. Like it's
no,
like we're going
no,
to do this,
no.
and you're open to change. And how do we
Yes.
navigate? And how do we negotiate? And
Yeah, yeah,
although
yeah, yeah.
I know we've had our fair share of deep conversations around, but if we go down, you're like Tom, if we go down this particular path, that's going to happen. And I'm like, yeah, but what's the probability? We would go back and forth on those. I miss those days of
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
design.
I like to hold on to a position until I can't, right?
Hmm.
So I will. I was at a company and we were debating what tool to get for BI, and at the time, IBM's Cognos was a big player in the field,
Yeah,
and there were a lot of people there who thought Cognos was the way, the be all end all, and
sure,
I spent weeks convincing them that that was not the right choice, and giving all the reasons that in the end they chose Cognos. But I think I like to think, hopefully it's true, when they did it with open eyes and they knew the downsides of what they were doing, not just the upsides. And so I
sure,
think it was a valuable, it's not just I think, the people told me it was a very valuable experience to go through
sure.
that process rather than just jump into something and then all of a sudden realize, ooh, maybe this wasn't the best idea.
Yeah, no, I think that's a consultant's responsibility. Like
Mm-hmm.
I distinctly, we did a lot of the types of projects that were software evaluations or
Mm-hmm. Yep.
comparisons, whether it's design
Mm-hmm.
decisions or software purchases or whatnot. And
Right.
I do believe that's one of the big values because it's so hard for a full time employee to dedicate that much attention to that activity when there's 20 other parts to their job. You bring in a
Mm-hmm.
hired gun or somebody who's done it before and who's good and
Right.
versed at it. Do you remember was it you that we worked with the analytic hierarchy process? Did we go through that together? That
That
was that.
sounds like something. That sounds
Yeah,
like
we
something
did.
I would be involved in.
Yeah. We did
Yeah.
that I'm pretty sure we did it at the multifamily team at Fannie
Uh,
Mae,
uh,
and it was this methodology for, we bring bias into a decision when we say like, we're going to go this path or that path, but then
uh,
when we actually break it down and do pairwise comparisons, it kind of
mm,
pulls out, it teases out that notion of,
right.
I'm coming in here with this instinctive bias, and it was a fascinating process, but at the end,
Hmm.
this is the lesson I think I certainly learned. The client's going to pick what the client's going to pick, and if you did what you
Right.
just said, which is give them the what's the word, you give them the counterpoints, and if they're going
Right.
to go with it and they understand the risks and they understand the upside and downside, then that's their call at the end of the day. So yeah,
Yeah. And if you don't have full knowledge like that, you go into something thinking this is perfect, right?
yeah,
And then as soon as something doesn't quite work the way you want, then you think, oh, maybe I made a bad decision. But if you go into it full knowledge, you know everything, the warts and the pluses, then things don't go wrong, right? They just we were expecting that, and we're ready to deal with it.
yeah.
So a lot of times, like you're saying, particularly inside companies, they don't have the time. They pick
Mm,
something because they read like 5 pages, or they saw a brochure, or they a salesperson, whatever.
yeah.
It,
Gar-
which
Gartner's
yeah,
latest
yeah,
thing.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
right. And it's hard. It's hard to fully comprehend um, the whole. I want to say the downsides, but it's more than that. It's just the whole thing, the whole uh, complete set, right? Because
Yeah.
nothing's perfect. No,
Nothing's perfect. No. Yeah,
yeah.
it's a series of trade-offs. Yeah, and I think that's
Uh-huh.
yeah, and I don't remember if this is something we came up with or is this something that I'd heard, but at the end of the day, one of the best decisions a client can make is one they're going to make and
Hmm.
stick with.
Yes. Yeah.
Because it's up to them at the end of the day.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's great. So tell me, like, what if you could share with me some of your like your personal interviewing experience, like what was maybe the best, worst, funniest interview experience that you've ever had, because it could be all three of what stands out.
um, so when I do interviews, right? When I'm interviewing people, what I like to do is sort of go through their resume and ask them in-depth questions about their open-ended in-depth questions about their
Mm,
resume, and let them bring, take the path. What I'm In some sense, what I'm looking for is integrity, right?
mm,
Because if somebody says, okay, I've done Kubernetes, and which is a technical thing for, and I ask, what is Kubernetes?
Mm.
You may or may not know. I fully know what Kubernetes is, but I'll still ask them, what is Kubernetes?
Mm.
And in them explaining what they know and don't know, I get a sense of, did they really use it? Did they really understand it? Did they really
I
know
see.
what they're doing? And I let this will probably come up a couple of times. I like to give people enough rope to hang themselves with, right? If they know what they're talking about, that's great, and we can
Yeah.
go on to something else. If they don't know what they're talking about, they're going to get twisted up in all sorts of,
In
and
all
then I
that
get a
rope.
sense of, yeah, exactly. And I'll get a sense of
Mm.
who they are. So I'm not talking about a specific example, but that's typically how I like to interview, when I'm allowed to. A lot of times interviews are much more structured than that. And I
Mm.
can't just go off on my own asking questions, but when I can, I do.
Yeah. So, and we've on the podcast, we've had different people at different levels of conversation, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and what you're describing is the sort of the classic. We want to make sure we understand what skills you bring to the table, right?
Right,
And
right.
do you really
Mm-hmm.
know what you really know? Like, there's been other cases where, the like my old, he's not old, sorry, Will, my former leader at Nomura
Uh-huh.
Securities. He assumes all that was vetted, and he's doing more of a
Right.
compatibility culture,
Uh-huh. Right, right.
leadership type test, whereas
Uh-huh.
you're getting into the details of the do you know the thing,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Which is, and they're
Mm-hmm.
both super important. In fact, I would
Mm-hmm.
argue that you can't get to that next level without really knowing the thing.
Right,
And
right,
I tell me more when you say open ended. So you just like what Kubernetes is as the
right,
example,
right.
but then you'll let them just sort of talk about something that they may not know about, and they're kind of winging it. Is that
Yeah, I think, um, yeah, like nobody can know everything, right? And yet, if you read a lot of resumes, people seem to know everything in, in a particular area. So I kind of want to know what they do know and what they don't know, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are.
Mm,
And I like to think, even when I'm delving into an area that they are expert in, or they have a lot of, I'm starting to get a sense not just of their expertise, but how they address problems.
mm.
Like, and I work with a lot of students on this. You We work in an industry that has to solve problems. So you
Yeah,
can't come up to a problem and say, "Oh well, I can't figure that out." So um, you can't give up, right? You got
sure.
Just because your immediate solution doesn't work, you've got to find an alternative solution. So I want to understand: is that the kind of person they are or not?
I see.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. And how do you foster that in students? Like, because I think that's where it starts, right? Or
Uh-huh.
probably even it starts well before that. But like, when you're
Right.
in higher education and you're presented with a student that's, well, I give up. How do you work around something like that?
Um, I,
Stick? You like grab
yeah.
a stick and just kind of whack them?
No,
Like,
no, it's hard to do. Particularly, I teach at colleges. By then, I we're all adults in college, right? And I try to treat them as peers. Um, I
some of us in college may
We're
not
less adult
have.
yet.
That's a good way to put it. I
Yes.
was I was physically mature.
Yeah. There you go. There you go. So I'm not there to. I'm there to teach them the topic, not
Mm.
necessarily the life skills.
the
Shall we?
strategy the
Yeah, all
strategy
that stuff.
for
Right,
interesting.
right,
Yeah,
right,
that's
right.
fair. Yeah.
So I talk to them about it. I say, um, what I just said.
Yeah, yeah.
We are in an industry. You're entering an industry where you have to solve problems.
Mm,
Not solving the problem is not a choice, right?
right.
You've got homework problems to do. They all have solutions, because I get people, students who come to me and say, "This doesn't work. I can't solve this." Right? Well, 22 other students in the class solved it.
Mm,
It's probably got a solution.
right, right,
Um,
right.
it Unfortunately, it's an internal thing, right? The person has to come to the realization that, um, just because something doesn't work doesn't mean there's not a solution.
Mm,
We always talk about, changing moving the problem around and solving that. Maybe that's
mm,
what you got to do.
mm. Interesting. Do you? I mean, I have to believe it's gotten much more. What's the word I want to use? Common, prevalent, where you used to search for the problem. Like back again, before there was Google, you'd ask a friend,
Yes, yes,
then
yes.
then you'd ask the machine. And now you're in a situation where you can like hand the problem to an artificial intelligence, chatbot or, conversation.
Hmm.
How do you see that playing out in the present, in your present space,
Yeah.
but also going forward?
So that's probably the biggest problem we face in education today, right?
Mm,
Because I want them to learn stuff. So again, I teach programming, right? So I want them to learn or not Pascal, Python or Java. I've dated myself there.
that was me
Um,
too. Turbo
yeah, yeah.
Pascal, baby. I
There you go.
remember
There
it.
you
Yeah.
go. So I want them to learn that. Now, when they get out into the quote unquote real world and they start doing the job, yes, they will be encouraged to use AI to solve to do things quicker, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But you can't do that without understanding how the underlying stuff works,
First.
right? For example, if I go to Gemini and say, create me a program that does X, whatever X is, it will, and it will be wrong because I've
Mm,
tried and I know that it will be
mm,
wrong. But I know enough about the underlying language and the underlying, to figure out where the problems are and solve them, right? My students don't. So
right.
they need to have the practice doing that so that when they get to the AI solution, they can do it. And it's an interesting problem because I don't mean to ramble on here, but
No, please do.
um, if they were an architect, they wouldn't have to learn how to lay bricks. I don't think, right? They can let the bricklayers lay the bricks, whereas I'm asking them to learn to be a bricklayer in essence, right? To write the programs before they can use the AI to write the programs for them.
Mm,
Essentially,
mm.
the bricklayer. I don't know what I haven't come up with a mental framework as to why it's different, but it is.
So, is it though? Like, I'm going to push on that a
Yeah.
bit,
Okay.
right?
Sure.
Because
Sure. Sure.
because I think where I'm, Eric, this conversation, and I've had similar ones
Mhm.
like this, have reminded me back when my kids were in, I don't know if it probably was elementary school, maybe
Mhm.
late elementary school, early
Uh,
middle school ish. My memory is not the best, but there was distinct moments in
mhm.
their learning education, like, why do I have to do math by hand? I have a
Right.
calculator.
Yes.
And it's like, why do I need to learn the multiplication tables? Why do I need to do long division? I hate long division. I'm like, we all hate it, but
Hmm.
it's learning how to do a procedure. It's learning how to do something that's important to learn how to do, and for those reasons, right? And I don't think it's changed. I think it's the same. It's just maybe what's different is the degree of complexity of the problem solving is order of magnitudes higher, maybe.
Right. Right. Right.
But it's still the machine giving you the answer.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I have a funny story about that.
Please.
So I'm on top of everything else we talked about. I'm currently pursuing a doctorate in AI and machine learning.
I mean,
Um,
why wouldn't you, Mike? This is
of
very
course,
on. It's very on brand.
on brand.
Yes.
Yes, yes. So I had to take a class in AI and machine learning math, right? Where they required me to relearn because I learned at one time how to do a bunch of things, including something called partial differential equations, which
I actually remember that.
yeah,
If you
yeah, yeah.
do, yeah.
Yeah, and it's
Oof.
been a while. Yes, it's been a
Oof.
while, and I had to go
Yes.
back and relearn that. And it's like,
Yeah.
why do I have to? And I complained to the professor at one point, saying the reason I was in computer science was so the computer could do this for me, and I didn't have to do it,
Right.
right? And then we learned about this was before we learned about the LLMs, the large language models like Gemini and ChatGPT and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And if I hadn't relearned partial differential equations, I would have a lot of trouble understanding how the internals of those things work.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. So I didn't necessarily have to do it, but I needed to understand that to be able to understand exactly what was going
Interesting.
on internally. And so that in that sense, it was helpful.
Yeah, and you weren't learning it for the first time as a painful
Right. Right.
undergrad.
Yes.
Like
Yes. Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I just wow, that's really interesting to me. Like,
Uh,
and that rings very true, right? Because if you want to
mhm.
understand how the machine works,
Right.
right,
Right.
whether it's a car engine or an LLM, right, it's
Uh-huh.
important to understand the principles of,
Right.
all the different physics dynamics or the
Yep.
mathematical
Yep.
dynamics. It's
Hmm.
interesting, and getting to that lower level, but that base level of understanding can then help you say this is how it does, and now I can take further leaps.
Right.
Interesting, very
Yeah. Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
I
That's what
will
I
say
think.
that was
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense to me. I really, really enjoy, like, that's, I think, one of the things I liked most about consulting, particularly when I was doing like the data architecture work, is that
Mm-hmm.
once you could put together the whether it was a schematic, a diagram, whatever, like the parts
Mm-hmm.
on a map that said, all right, here's what we're going to build this, we're going to build this process or this infrastructure or both, right? And then saying, like, where does it break, like where does it stop working, or how do we optimize this piece, and you can't do that without knowing how all the parts work,
Right, right.
and
Yeah,
where the weak points
absolutely.
might be. Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, staying on the math arena. Years ago, I worked at I did consulting at a insurance firm, Munich Re, and I worked with the actuaries there on
Mm.
figuring out. We don't need to go into all the details of what we were figuring out, but one of the things was these curves, right? They would the values that we got in would constantly curve, but we wanted to fit them in a certain way. I'm trying to just right.
Could you just pause for a second? So the
Sure.
actuaries they're modeling like life expectancy, or they're what is the
It's historical risk. What the risk was historically, so they can provide information to the price. There's two kinds of actuaries: reserving actuaries and pricing actuaries. So these
okay,
are the reserving actuaries trying to figure out the historic risk, so they
I
can
see.
provide information to the pricing actuary, so they can price future risks.
And it could be for policy level, or in any whatever they're pricing for, whether it's
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
different kinds of coverage or policy, or where the thresholds would
Hmm.
be for deductibles or whatnot. Okay, got
Right,
it.
right, right. And so we had to estimate what the actual curve was. And it
Mm.
was a lot of fun going, remembering all my math about how to calculate curves and
Sure.
second order and third order derivatives and stuff like that. It was a lot of fun doing that. So
Nice.
that was probably my most mathy consulting
Matthew.
project. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I would say, particularly you would think in the data space that we've been in for so long, we would be doing more math, but a lot of what we do is more the like relational, it's more relating things and organizing things, and it's less
Yeah.
so the actual calculated math. But I imagine the data
Yeah.
science work you're doing is much more, like you said,
Much
much
more
more
mathy.
mathy.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes. Actually, it's interesting. I tell my students that because first off, they're all computer science students, right?
Mm,
And I tell them you're probably not going to be working. You're probably not going to be building an operating system, building a programming language. You're probably going to be working in IT in some company
mm,
somewhere. And when you go to an IT shop, right? You go to like a big company, they might have 300 people in their IT area, right?
mm-hmm,
Of which I don't know, out of 300, maybe 50, 80 are developers, programmers,
mm.
right? The rest are project managers, business analysts, designers, testers,
UX people. Yeah.
all these other roles that are required to do it. So it doesn't mean that you have to become a programmer to be part of IT. It's a
Mm,
skill you can use to leverage into something else.
interesting.
And I say the example would be look at it, play a game, and at the end of it, a video game, at the end of it, look at all the people who worked on it. You'll
That's
see,
good.
right? You'll see six programmers and 200 other people who were
Interesting.
involved in it, right? And that's
Yeah,
the way
that's
the
really
world
true.
works. There's so much more
Yeah.
to do than just programming. If that's,
Just coding.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I
Hmm.
wish somebody had told me that, because I kind of learned that
Hmm.
earlier
Right.
in my career. Like I had thought I was going to be a programmer. My first gigs out of college were consulting job, like literally like very like program consulting, just do the thing, right?
Hmm.
Actually, it was coding CSP at IBM 100 years ago,
Oh, wow.
when
Yeah.
software that probably doesn't even exist. It was like
Hmm.
the conceptual precursor to Java, if you can imagine,
Okay.
cross system product. It was anyway,
Hmm.
but the my takeaway from this is just not for me. Like, this is not something
Right,
I'm
right, right.
enjoying, and it didn't use the skills that I wanted to, or rather that I didn't even know were in me, that are more the people skills,
Yes.
that are where I get my energy from. Right. So like, it was less of, can I build the thing? I loved building the thing, to be very honest. From a little kid, I had like a
Right,
Commodore,
right.
my Commodore VIC-20. I
Yeah, yeah,
loved,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
oh my God, this is like, I'm in a perfect world. I could make things happen all by myself. Right. But as I sort of grew, as I realized I wanted more of social interactions in my career. I wanted more. I got into pre-sales. So like
Uh-huh.
working with salespeople and clients to implement their software that we were selling was incredibly rewarding. It was fun. It was interesting. We had so many different problems. And over time, I found out in myself, like,
Uh-huh.
I'm happy not being a programmer,
Right, right,
and
right,
that's okay. Like I
right.
still,
There's
like
plenty
you
to
said,
do. Yeah.
there's plenty to do. And I
Hmm.
still solve problems and just in
Hmm.
a different way. And later in the chain, or sometimes early in the chain for finding like gaps and requirements or whatnot. Like,
Uh-huh.
yeah, I like it.
Yeah. I came to the same sort of conclusion, but different from a different direction.
Mm,
So back in the '90s, me and two friends formed a company, ASI Financial Services,
mm,
and we grew it to about 50 people.
wow.
And what I learned from that experience was I could work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I can only do, you multiple figure that out, and I can do X, right?
Yeah.
But if I can figure out how to effectively work with the 50 people we had on our team to actually
Mm,
get stuff done, I can do 50X.
right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Get
Not
scale.
50.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I know what you
And
mean.
yeah, and I can't do it. There's only so much I can do myself. And if I want to accomplish things, I've got to accomplish it through, it sounds horrible, through other people. I've got to be able to
No.
work with other people. I want to say leverage because that's a word we use in consulting a lot,
Yeah.
but it's collaboration. It's getting everybody on the same page. I remember at this one guy, his first name was Xerxes. I don't remember his last name. And he had his own ideas about everything, right? He wanted to do this, that, or the other, which wasn't helping us, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was a challenge for me to get him on the same page, so
Interesting.
that because he's a brilliant programmer,
Hmm.
so that he would be delivering what we actually needed, not what he was
Hmm.
most currently interested in.
Yeah. Yeah. No. And I think, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that like management,
Hmm.
effective management, right,
Hmm.
is executing through others. It's,
Yes.
and in that journey though, this is something I fundamentally believe, right?
Hmm.
If you are aligned, and
Hmm.
that like you and Xerxes had a problem aligning
Hmm.
on, right?
Right.
And
Right.
that if we've got this goal, we've got this outcome we're trying to get towards, this is
Right.
the thing we need to deliver. And you're aligned, that's incredibly satisfying when the
Hmm.
person who's building the thing and you are like in sync and you're able to execute effectively and get that leverage because now you as a manager can talk to 10 people, maybe not 100 or 50, right? But you can get that at that leverage, that extension. I think that's because then if the party who's building the thing is also excited about the thing that they're building, everyone wins.
Right, 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 right. So it's funny at the time, there were three of us, Claude, John, and myself, right?
Mm.
John was reading a book called the Leadership Skills of Attila the Hun or something. I forget. It was a popular book back then,
Okay.
right? Right. And I'm reading the Zen of Leadership, right? So you can see we had different ideas about
Maybe
this.
different,
Yeah, very
maybe different
different
schools.
ideas. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's
But
hilarious.
I later learned something called servant leadership relatively recently, within the past 10 years or so. And until then, I never had a coherent um, management leadership style. And
Mm.
once I read about servant leadership, it fit, and I could fit everything together, and it made my style much more coherent than it was up
Interesting.
until then. I have
So
no idea what John's up to with his
Attila the Hun
Tilla.
approach.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's the stick thing.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
so if you could tell our listener about the servant leadership
Right. So
approach.
servant leadership is the idea that in order to lead people, you have to serve them.
Mm.
You have to, right? The people, if I've got a team of 10, they're doing all the work. I'm just there to make sure they're all heading in the right direction. So I get everything out of the way so they can accomplish the task at hand, right? And getting things out of the way could be blockers, it could be lack of resources. There's all sorts of things you could, but it could also be not connecting on the goal that we have, right? And but so it's serving them so that they can. What I At the end of the day, I want them to feel good about themselves,
Mm.
right? I want them to feel like they've accomplished something bigger and better than they are.
Mm.
Um, just one little aside on that. I firmly believe, and I've done it over and over again, you don't start a team by saying we're going to get X done. We're going to work on this, and then suddenly you've all got to get it done and everything. I think you give the team a minimum of 2 weeks to get to know each other, to get to know their working style,
Yes.
to to become a team, to gel as a team
Hmm.
before we start things that have repercussions of not succeeding, right?
Abs-
Yeah. So,
can't agree with you more. We're humans, and we need that
mhm.
social connection. We need to
Yeah,
understand each other's. Yeah.
right. Strengths and weaknesses, so that when if we got to get a database built and person X is no good at it, person Y is really good at it, the team knows that, and so they make sure the right person is doing the right job, kind of thing, just
Yeah.
naturally.
I like that. I do. I think it's
Hmm.
a critical thing, and 2 weeks might be a long time, but like that's the practicality. But it takes time. It's not something you can
Right,
just
right, right.
rush. Yeah.
So I was doing, after our time at Capco at another consulting company, I had a 10-week project and 4 team members to work on, right?
Hmm.
And I took the first 2 weeks to do what and
Oh,
the salesperson is like, breathing down my back saying, we said we would have this done, this done. Where is it? What are you doing? Right? I'm like,
yeah.
I'm getting us ready to be a highly productive, effective team, right? And at the end of the day, we were doing work we were doing a strategy project for the
Hmm.
CIO. At the
Hmm.
end of the day, the CIO was like blown away by what we delivered. And I don't think if we hadn't taken those 2 weeks to um, build the team,
Gel.
we
Yeah.
would not have gotten there. Hmm.
Hmm. That's great. Yeah, no,
Hmm.
and those are the creating those intent. Not they're not always intangible. Creating that
Hmm.
collection of assets that are a mix of tangible, but have an
Hmm.
intangible, like sometimes
Hmm.
scope to them, like a strategy for X,
Right,
Y, or Z. Really requires that degree of creativity. That it's not just do the thing. It's
right,
kind
right,
of
right,
you've got to touch all the different areas that might come, and that degree of creativity was another one of the joys of consulting. It's
yeah,
like
yeah,
had we even considered creating a center of excellence or doing
right,
this
right,
type of thing, right? And
right.
bringing those bits to play. How important do you think the role of why we're doing this plays into this?
Um,
Into team
yeah.
building, team motivation, like helping them understand the why behind the work.
Um, on the one hand, I think it's incredibly important, right?
Mm.
You, you can't get behind something unless you know why you're doing it.
Hmm.
Why is it important? Um, and to my 2 week thing, getting everybody right. There is a limit to
Mm.
because there are people who will continually ask why, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
there's a limit to that. Like at some point, we just got to
Just got to go.
Yeah, yeah. We that 10-week window is not closing, right?
Mm.
that
Yeah,
that
right,
10
right.
that 10-week end date is not changing. That's when
Right.
it's due.
Love it.
So we will have time to explore, and then we have time to deliver. And
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah,
you
yeah.
can't you can't mix the two.
Right. Right. I see. So you
Yeah.
would put that why are we doing this in the exploration
Mhm.
bucket,
Yes. Yeah.
right? But it's equally important to build the connections between the team and the like. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
It's an interesting there are some people who think you start with why and you go, the why leads into
Hmm.
into the what and then eventually the
Yeah.
how. But then the
Right.
other side is like, but we especially on a compressed project,
Yeah. Yeah.
what the
Yeah.
why
But
in something like a short
yeah.
gig like that can be explained fairly
Yeah.
quickly. Yeah.
And to be fair, consultants coming into a project shouldn't be asking a lot of why questions.
Mm.
I mean, they obviously would need to know why relevant to the company. Like, why is this company interested in the divesting? We
Mm.
might need to know that because that's what they're doing.
Hmm.
But why do we have to do this particular step in order to properly account for divestment?
Oh, oh, oh.
They shouldn't be asking that question. They should be there because they have that expertise.
Okay, yeah. No, thank you for
Mm-hmm.
clarifying. I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
like that perpetual question every step of the way. Well, why are we doing this task
Yeah,
today? Why
yeah,
don't we do it tomorrow? No, I was more what's the
yeah,
big picture why? What's the
yeah, yeah,
motivation
yeah,
behind the goal? Okay, yeah, understood. I'm
yeah,
glad I
yeah.
clarified that because I was like, all right, how hard do I push back on Mike? Because I think that why is important. But yeah,
Yes,
the perpetual why is annoying as heck. you know?
and maybe consulting's not for you if that's the way you take on the world.
That's a
Consulting
really
is,
good
yeah, good.
No, no, no. That's a really good point, right? Because
Hmm.
if you're constantly asking the why question, journalism might be a better spot for you. or
Yeah,
interesting.
there's kind of a joke in consulting, right? That when a project comes up, we're all experts in whatever it is, right? Um, and you
Yes,
can't all be experts in that, but you also have to be an expert. You have to be flexible. Like I can't just say, oh, I only do Oracle database work. I don't do
sure.
SQL Server, right? If a SQL Server project comes up and I've never used SQL Server before, as a consultant, it's incumbent upon me to figure that out and
Mm,
become, use all my resources, whether it's Gemini, Google search, a book. I like books, so for me it would be
I
a
do.
book.
I
Yeah,
do too. I'm a
yeah,
fan of the
yeah.
books. Yes, for sure. Yeah.
But it's incumbent upon me to use those resources to be expert enough, right?
Mm,
So that as a consultant, because if not, I'm not a good consultant. I'm not a valuable. At least I take it as being having tunnel vision of I only do ERP system, SAP ERP. I guess that's big enough, maybe, but you know,
well, but the problem with hyper specialization is then
hmm
when that market changes,
right,
then do you want to be that 60-year-old person who's still coding COBOL?
right,
Right.
right,
Maybe like if you're perfectly happy with that, then that might be okay. But then the
hmm
pool dries up quickly. And then if you find yourself in a position where you've got to feed your family,
hmm
it gets a little
right,
harder. It gets a
right.
little harder,
So again, if you go into consulting, if that's the job you're interested in, you need to think about that and make sure you're the kind of person who who maybe can do something without completely understanding why you're doing it.
Mm,
You
yeah.
know.
Yeah, that's good. That's very good advice, Mike. Thank you for that. I think you've
hmm
got to be comfortable being uncomfortable
hmm
with your,
hmm
and then, like you said, figure it out.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
I've got enough of the resources to take that through. No, that's great. I know. One of the things that we were talking about, like it was your worst decision while job hunting. You want to explore that a little bit?
Um, what would be?
This was from your prompt where you'd said, "Or why you should not trust my judgment."
Oh, my worst. Okay, now I get that. Okay,
Yes.
so back in I went to Washington University in St. Louis, and I was getting ready to graduate in 1982, and so that tells how old I am. Um, and I had
No
three.
comments.
Yeah, I
No
had three.
judgment.
Yeah. I had three opportunities. Right, one was with a company called RCA Video Discs in New York City.
Hmm.
Another was with a company called IBM in Rochester, Minnesota, working for what was back then the System 38 and would have become the AS400.
Hmm.
And the third was with a little company in Arizona of about 25 people or so. So after deciding on all those, I chose to work for RCA Video Discs.
Hmm.
Does RCA exist anymore?
Mm-mm.
Does video disc does anybody even know what a video disc is now?
Probably
Um,
not.
but I saw that as and I worked on a what do you call it royalty admin system for RCA video disc. So when actors they would get paid 2 cents every
Ah,
time it was
yes, yes, yes.
right, that kind of stuff. So I worked on that. And actually, that was a mathy thing, um, but
I'm sure.
and I'm glad I didn't take IBM. IBM offer was pretty good, but Rochester, Minnesota was I'm sure it's a great place to live and everything, just
Hmm.
not my
Not
place.
for you. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm more of a East Coast person. Um, the little company in Arizona is now called, well, it was called then Microsoft. So so don't take my judgment.
You were doing so well on this interview. I have to say,
Yeah,
up
yeah, yeah,
until that was. I'm glad you brought that up. But no, but
yeah,
like
yeah.
we all have and will make those. Maybe not at that extreme.
Well, who
I
knew at the
remember.
time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's funny. I'm not going to name names. It's going to be for those people in the know. But I worked for a company who was making a decision to invest in a strategy. They had a pile of cash and they wanted to invest, make an acquisition, their first acquisition. And
Mm,
they were contemplating a time. This goes back into the excuse me. This goes back into the early days of technology.
mm-hmm.
We'll say, which would be what, like the 90s.
Right.
And the CEO was making a sort of technical decision between artificial intelligence fledgling back in the day something called expert systems. I don't know
Right.
if
Yep.
most people probably don't remember that, but they were rule based,
Yep. Yep.
ways
Yep.
of codifying human knowledge such
Yep.
that the idea wasn't just replace a human. Like we still have this problem, but the idea was to basically accelerate a process and to capture knowledge that people can take with them, et cetera.
Yep.
And the alternative was invest in a relational database because the company had a reporting platform that was on a similar to what like Progress and Ingress, the 4GL they called them, right? This sort
Right,
of
right, right.
English language, business language,
Yeah, yeah.
this relational database, and he ended up choosing the path of the relational database. Of the expert system,
Uh-huh.
which, as we know, kind of tapered off for 20 years before ML and a whole different approach towards artificial intelligence
Right.
took in. And the relational database company at the time was a small one known as Sybase.
Ah, yes.
And for those folks who don't know, Sybase was the competitor to IBM's DB2 and Oracle at the time. There were these database wars, and it would
Hmm.
have changed the whole tenor of the company.
Yes, yes, yeah.
This would have been a very different direction. So you're not alone in making calls. My own personal decision I made to take a short hop. I think I might have mentioned this on another conversation where
Hmm.
this company sold me on do this thing. It's going to be great. It's going to be the best. And wasn't. It was just, it
Hmm.
was not. And, you make mistakes. And I think the two things there are learn from your mistake. What got you into this position in the first place? Were you running away from something? Right? Were you
Hmm.
running towards something?
Right, right,
That kind of thing. And don't be afraid to pull a trigger quickly. Like if you know it's wrong, get out.
right. And I think it's important to understand the motivation of people, right?
Mm,
Because if I'm when I was building ASI Financial Services, I needed people to help me build it, right? I needed to
sure.
hire people, but it was a small company. We had no funding, right? So
Mm,
we were at least for the first 2 years, month to month kind of thing.
mm,
Um, but I need to convince people to come work for me, right?
mm-hmm.
So I would not out and out lie to anybody, but I would make it sound better, you know, potentially better, potentially, all these things, because I need to convince them that ASI was a good place to work.
Sure.
It was
And it
right, and
was.
it turned
Sure.
it ended up being really good.
Yeah.
But people will tell you what they tell you because of their motivation and their viewpoint on the world.
Yeah.
So you got to take that with a grain of salt, whatever, and make
Yeah.
sure
Pinch of
you're
salt.
understanding it, because if it's too good to be true, it probably is.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the tenet of
Hmm.
interviewing. And I think you bring up a very good point. Like where I've interviewed, at least, it's particularly for the smaller companies where
Hmm.
you can say, "Hey, I want to speak to leadership." Right? I'd like to
Right,
get the
right, right.
CEO's point of view of
Hmm.
things. Like especially the smaller companies,
Right,
you can learn a lot from those
right,
conversations.
right.
Like where do you see the company going? What do you see the future of this, or how do you see the market changing? You can tell fairly quickly that
Hmm.
you are dealing with a person who is a visionary or who's blowing
Hmm.
smoke, right?
Right,
Like
right.
if the answer is we're going to change the market and we're going to be $1 billion company and we're right now making 5 million, but
Yeah,
that you got to be careful of the hype CEO because I
yeah,
can
yeah,
tell
yeah.
you I've worked with plenty of them and it's like it's great to have the big vision, right? I think that is super important, but
Yes,
at the same
yes.
time you've got to think about it in terms of stages. Like, do you need to acquire a company? Do you need to grow the company? Like, how do we get to
Hmm.
that vision?
Right.
If it's just the shining house on the hill, how we're going to get there is a little trickier.
Yeah, and having the vision without the resources just doesn't work. There's very
Mm,
few companies that can grow without resources. Like when Google was first founded, there were lots of search companies, and there were search companies with lots more money than Google, like
mm.
Lycos and what's the other one, Alta
Alta
Vista,
Vista, Alta
right? All
Vista,
those,
yeah, yeah.
right? But um, the founders of Google had a vision, so they had that vision part, but they were also willing to give up control to get the
Mm,
resource they need to make that vision come true.
mm,
If I don't know a lot of details about the founding, but they had to get a lot of compute resources in
yeah.
order to put that first little window out. So
Mm-hmm.
they had to get a lot of money. I think Perkins was one of their original
I
funders
don't
or something.
remember. Yeah,
Yeah, but whoever it
yeah.
was, without I've worked with a lot of founders who are not willing to give up control. Right, I want to maintain 51% control, and that's great. But you may never have more than 51% control of a $50 million company.
Right.
Whereas if you give up control, go down to 20%, you may end up with 20% of a $50 billion company, which obviously there's very few of those. But
Mm,
it's the bigger, what is it, the bigger slice, no, the smaller slice of a bigger pie, maybe more valuable. I want to say we shouldn't be overestimating our worth in these things. right? Like the founders think everything is about me, which maybe it is, right? I mean, you could make that case about Bill Gates, for example, but
How
there's very
so?
few people. Well, Microsoft probably wouldn't be what it is today without Bill Gates for a
Oh, I
long time
see.
along the way.
I see.
Very
I
few
see.
companies are like that. From what I know about Apple, Stephen Jobs was the front person who presented this image and did a lot, but internally, it wasn't him that drove Apple to where they are. It was a lot of other people like
Sure.
Johnny Ive and people like that.
I
Um,
wonder how much of that is press.
yeah, it's hard to
But I
know.
take your point. I take your
Right,
no your
right,
point. Your point
right.
stands. I'm not debating the
Yeah,
point, but I'm like,
right.
maybe Bill had a better PR man than Steve Jobs.
Maybe, yeah,
Like,
yeah, could be. But I think again, we work as a collective, we work together as a group. You know, I mean, Bill Gates couldn't program every possible thing that Microsoft did, although he apparently did a lot. But
yeah,
they're
right, right.
yeah, yeah. But they bought a lot of companies and they integrated them and all that kind of stuff. So the point being, sometimes we have to give up control in order to grow. If that's our goal, I mean, maybe growth is not our goal, right? Some people like a 10-person consulting firm. That's all they ever want to be.
Yeah, and I think there's plenty of CEOs that I've met that
Mm-hmm.
have their desire for control outweighs the
Mm-hmm.
needs of the many, right?
Right,
The
right,
needs of the company. I've got a number of personal examples where
right.
people have made decisions about acquisition. Like
Mm-hmm.
acquisition is the ultimate loss of control, and to choose we can do this better than company X we're partnering with. Now, sometimes that's right. I'm not questioning everyone's judgment, just want the
Mm-hmm.
payout. But the reality is that unless you're really thinking hard about like checking your ego and making sure like this company, we're going to sell it for X because we would never, or not never, but what we can get today, we're not going to grow to in X units of time.
Right,
So
right.
let's become part of a bigger thing, and then maybe try something different with
Mm-hmm.
that giant mountain of cash we all would have had.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Yes, I'm speaking about one specific incident that I will not discuss.
There you go. There you go.
But no, that's great, Mike. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I know we're coming up on the hour, so the one question that I'm interested in from a personal perspective, what advice would you give your younger self? What would you looking back, if you had an opportunity to time travel and not buy a lottery ticket, but time travel and talk to yourself, what counsel would you give Mike Wacey, of young Mike Wacey?
Hmm. Hmm. What would I give myself? Like, on the one hand, I want to say, and maybe this is my self-preservation feeling. I want to say I wouldn't give any different advice, right? My career's meandered around a couple of different things. I took some were good decisions, some were bad, but they were decisions I made. I shouldn't regret them. So do the same thing would be part
Hmm.
of it. Um, on the other hand, I oftentimes say two things that I've said, and I don't want I want to be very clear. They're not regrets. They're just alternate paths I could have taken.
Sure.
One was since I graduated from college and started working, I got the chance to do some work with some professors at Stanford, and I wish I'd known about Stanford when I was applying to college because it would have been
I
great to
see.
go there. The environment, the abilities, the whole thing is so different than almost any other school I've been involved in. I would have loved to have gone there. So that
How did you get exposed to it now, like later in life, or that you're even aware of it, or is it just through like have you been there? Or is it an in-person experience, or is it something you've
yeah,
read, learned
that's in
about?
person. So back in the '90s when I had my company, it was early in the data warehousing days. In fact, a little story about that. We were building this data warehouse to manage customer profitability for banks, which is lots of data, right? You get millions of billions of records kind of thing. And I wasn't sure how to solve a particular problem we were having. So I was on a plane with this guy talking about, and whenever I'm on a plane, half the time I talk to the person next to me and I never regret it. Half the time I don't. So I talked to this guy. It turns out the guy I'm sitting next to is Ralph Kimball, who you may or may not have heard of.
Are you serious? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
I knew Ralph. So for those who don't know, Ralph
Uh,
was the founder of. He's the designer of
uh,
the original star schema data modeling, the data
right,
warehousing books, and all that. And
right,
the company that I worked for, one of the first companies I worked for in
uh,
software, was Red Brick Systems. He founded Red
right,
Brick.
right,
Yeah,
right. Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So I'm chatting with him, and he goes, he explained the star schema to me, which I immediately rejected and said that's a ridiculous idea. How could you possibly do that, right? Because that's the way I am, right?
That's
So
hilarious.
yeah, so he gave me he had a copy of his data warehouse toolkit book, which I still have. He gave it to me. He didn't sign it though. I should have gotten him to sign it. I didn't know who he was at the time,
Of
right?
course.
I figured I don't know, whatever. So when I got back, I started thinking about it, and it did solve our problem, and we went on to build a whole essentially build a whole company around star schemas. But moving forward, we're using Oracle for our database, but Oracle at the time was not Oracle today. We had to pre-sort data to load it to do all sorts of things. We're using something called sync sort, and I was trying to figure out how all these things go together.
I remember
Um,
those days
right?
because data loaded so much faster when it was pre-sorted.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So I got involved with the Oracle. I ran into a problem with Oracle. I got involved talking to Oracle people. I got called in to work with them. We solved it. There's something called buffer release mechanism. It's deep inside Oracle or any database, and it's really what makes databases fast. Right? Is the ability to release buffer space is what identify which buffer space needs to be released. And so I worked with them on that. So we solved that problem. At the time, they were working with some professors at Stanford on there's different kinds of indexing. There's tree indexing and hash indexing and stuff. We're working on different indexing methods. So I got involved with that. So it was basically all pro bono work that I got to do, but it was a lot of fun. So that's how I got that. That was my connection to Stanford.
Interesting. And zooming back to the original question, which
Mm-hmm.
is like the lesson you would have given yourself, might
uh,
maybe would be, don't be afraid to explore opportunities that are not necessarily in the traditional path, or maybe stretch for like the different
yeah.
higher education options, that kind of thing.
What as I've gone through that story and everything, it was interesting because during the '90s, I was growing this company called ASI Financial Services. We were building it out. We made money from our first month, and meanwhile, there's all these internet companies coming, World Wide Web companies coming along who aren't making a cent and are getting tons of funding. We didn't have any funding, and and you know maybe I should have taken more of a risk. Maybe I was too conservative in a sense of not staying inside my bubble of thing. I don't know, whatever you want to call it, and
Yeah.
not willing to, maybe when I saw all that World Wide Web stuff, we should have taken ASI in that direction, and we didn't. We stuck with what we were doing. So,
Well, that's maybe be a little more be
mm-hmm.
a little less risk averse. I think
Yeah,
there's a degree with which risk can be exciting. It can be
right,
terrifying,
right,
right?
right.
You can lose the company. So yeah, I think it's amazing the business principles of the old days, and I don't even
Mm-hmm.
know how far back I would go. But the idea that you need to be profitable to be highly valued is something that was a tenet, like a bedrock and
Uh-huh.
now it's like the notion it's just all about future earnings, and what are we pitching? Where could we be to value the
Mm-hmm.
company is hard to sometimes process. But I
Mm-hmm.
understand, like on some hand, I understand it because Wall Street's entirely based on future earnings.
Right,
But
right, right.
then at the same time, like can we really predict the future? Like I don't know.
No, and it's you have to accept that, right? Like there are going to be 20 companies. Like again with Google, right? There were 20 companies doing search, and quote unquote Google won, right? So people bet on all 20, and some people lost and some people won. It's harsh, but it's reality, and there's nothing wrong with
Absolutely.
it, right? And the winner isn't necessarily technically the best business. You never know what the mixture of things, the integration of things that make something win. But you got to, if you don't try, you never, you can't win. So you got to
That's right.
try. Yeah.
That's right. You have to try. You have to keep trying, and not
Mm-hmm.
be the goal is to not be one of those left in the dust at some
Right.
point.
Right. Right.
But learning and figuring out what the winners are doing is super useful. And sometimes it's luck. There's
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's being in the right position at the right times. There's a lot of
Yeah.
factors, and the whole sections in the Barnes and Noble, right? That'll
Yeah.
explain these strategies.
But I imagine the people who worked really hard at Lycos and learned a lot of stuff and did a lot of things are doing okay. What you don't want to do is give up, right?
I agree. I agree.
Even if Lycos didn't succeed in the marketplace, it's not it's not a reflection of the people there, right? The people there were
That's
still
right.
smart, they were hardworking.
That's right.
The, Lycos just didn't have the right combination,
Mm.
and so those people can go on and do something else.
Yeah.
You know. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that's the lesson for the folks in the early stages of their career,
Mm-hmm.
where you might not be at the next
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft or the next Google or whatnot,
Mm-hmm.
but the company that you're working for, you should try your best to learn as much
Mm-hmm.
as you possibly can and to grow as much as you can, because I think that's what differentiates the career progression between, as an individual contributor, as somebody who's going into management or whatnot, that separates you from the average candidate, the average employee. And maybe being average is fine. Like, maybe you're happy at this level. Some people
Mm-hmm.
are very comfortable being good at the thing that they do and become maybe
Right.
great over time, or they have other passions outside of work. Right, at the end of
Right.
the day, finding that balance is an important thing. I've always believed that, trying to be the best at what you're doing, through learning, through trying, through experimentation, like we talked a lot about, is ultimately in your best interest.
Right. I actually did. Just think in my head of something that I would tell my younger self, which is take the offer from the company in Arizona.
Yeah, and like, I'm going to predict something that's going to happen. Like, maybe
uh,
here's an idea.
right. Right. Right.
That's awesome, Mike. Thank you so much for ending on such a good note. I
There you go.
appreciate that. I want to say thank you again for your time today,
Oh, it's been a
and
pleasure. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Yeah, it's been really great. Time just flies, and again, I
Mm-hmm.
know we took a chunk of it, so thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome. Take care.